Good afternoon, everyone. We're going to present our paper today entitled Examining the Volunteering Behavior of Filipino Youth Using the Extended Theory of Planned Behavior. I am Dr. Reynaldo Bautista Jr. from the Marketing Department, and my team members are Dr. Christine Joy A. Ballada and Dr. Joy S. Rabo. We're going to share the airtime and discuss various parts of our research. I'm gonna start with the background of the study. When we talk about volunteering behavior, this is a common activity in the Philippines. And when we look at statistics in the US, there is an estimated number of around 15.5 million or 55% of the youth ranging from 12 to 18 years old. They participate actively in volunteering activities. And more than one fourth of those population, they actually donated around 52 hours to non-government organization based on the US Census. And similar picture is present in the Philippines, an estimated number of around 312.3 million hours, which is valued at 20.1 billion, were rendered in 2000 by volunteers. And according to previous studies, individuals can be effectively recruited to volunteer. And with their volunteering behavior, it increases their citizenship behavior relative to the organizations that they belong to. And then one of the challenges is that there are limited researches on youth volunteerism, specifically on those who participate in volunteer work. And also there is a gap in terms of the factors that will gonna influence the younger generation to participate in volunteering activities, and this will be a part of the contribution of this paper because we're gonna look at some factors that will encourage the younger generation to participate in volunteering behaviors. This study is anchored on the theory of planned behavior, and we extended it as part of our contribution to knowledge by including behavioral modeling by family and peers as a precursor to volunteer among the Filipino youth. And then this actually study actually aims to address the lack of theoretical framework that examines the adolescent volunteerism behavior using the theory of planned behavior. So this is the anchor theory that we're using, theory of planned behavior. It's extended because we added behavioral modeling of family and peers. In a nutshell, when we talk about a theory of planned behavior, this is a theory that looks at any behavior, whether it's volunteering or shopping or going to the malls and so on. So across all of the behaviors can be studied using a TPB framework. But for the purpose of this study, we're putting in the context of volunteering behavior. The traditional variables of TPB are attitude towards the behavior. In this case, it's volunteering, subjective norms, and perceived behavioral control. And then our extension, which is the behavioral modeling by family and peers, leading to intention and then to volunteering behavior. When we talk of attitudes, we're just talking about the perception or or the regard of the participants on the specific behavior. Uh, Here, we're looking at the attitude of the younger generation towards volunteering, whether it's positive or negative. And then subjective norm refers to the people who are important to the respondents. In this case, probably it's going to be their family, their friends, and because according to the theory, the perception of the people that are important to the respondents would also influence their intention to volunteer and then later on their volunteering behavior. And then finally, perceived behavioral control talks about providing some channels or areas where the people will be able to do volunteering activities like provision of an event or list of probably organizations that they can participate and render their service. For the behavioral modeling, we're looking at actual participation of either the family or peers. Because according to literature, if your family members are actively participating in volunteering behavior, more or less, you're gonna also follow their behavior. You're gonna also have the higher tendency to volunteer. Similar with your peers, especially now that most of the younger generations are heavily connected with their peers, and there's a strong influence from their friends to influence their behavior. So hopefully we're gonna test this behavioral modeling, family and peers, whether these are effective antecedents to intention to volunteer and then later on to the volunteering behavior. The next part will be discussed by Ms. Teen Baliada.
So the participants of our study were undergraduate students of De La Salle University. So there were 438 students who participated. 60% of this were females, and the rest were males, and 1% gave no response. The age range from 17 to 23 years old, with a mean age of 19.6 and a standard deviation of 1.12. Next slide, please. We used the TPB Volunteerism Scale, which we developed according to the guidelines of Fishbane and Eisen. The volunteerism scale included four parts. The first three parts made use of a 6 point agreement scale from strongly disagree to strongly agree. And these included three portions: intention to volunteer, perceived subjective norms, and perceived behavioral control. So you have there on this slide the different sample items for each of the components. And then we also have the section on attitude towards volunteering, which made use of a 6 point semantic differential scale where respondents were asked to rate whether volunteering in civic engagement would be good versus bad or pleasant versus unpleasant. The next slide, we also use the family modeling and peer modeling scale, which is anchored on the instrument developed by Law and Sheck. So it's a 6 point Likert scale, also agreement type, which range from strongly disagree to strongly agree. And it included items focusing on family modeling as well as on peer modeling. For the procedure, we sought approval from our University Research Coordination Office and the Research Ethics Office, and also permission from course coordinators and faculty. And once these permissions were given, we already conducted our survey using our online questionnaire. So please take note that this was administered through our learning management system, which we call Animo Space. And the data were gathered from August to September 2020. For the data analysis, we made use of descriptive statistics. And to test the TPB model, we made use of structural equation modeling. So we tested two models, the original and the extended TPB. So these are the descriptive statistics and correlations. If you look at the um, relationships of the variables, you can see that there are very strong and significant relationships, and these are all in the hypothesized direction. So we expected intention to be significantly and positively correlated with attitude, with norms, and with perceived behavioral control, as well as with family and peer modeling. And we can see that those directions were confirmed. We also noted that in terms of skewness and kurtosis, our variables actually did not really divert or disperse too much from normality. And so we were convinced that we can use the statistics, the tools that we intended. Looking also at the scales, we note that the Cronbach's alpha values are all quite high. In fact, we have very strong internal consistency reliability for all of our scales. Next slide, please. So when we tested our TPB model, we also had to check if the model actually shows good fit with the data. So we tested first the original TPB, which did not include the peer and family modeling. So if you look at the fit statistics, we can see that CFI and TLI were quite high. It met the criterion of above zero point 0.9. Ramsea is 0.075, but the 90% confidence interval included 0.06, which is usually the normal cutoff for Ramsea, and our SRMR, where the cutoff would be around zero point zero 0.05 also, or zero point zero 0.04 in some research, but that fits, that shows, indicates that the model is a good fit. But since we wanted to extend the TPB to include family and peer modeling, when we tested the extended TPB model, we saw that the CFI and the TLI and the other fit statistics kind of were marginal. No, it's not very high, but these were still relatively okay. And we tried to re-specify the model by co-varying some of the um, errors, and we were able to improve a bit the model fit. No? So that can be evident. That's evident in the CFI, in the TLI, where we saw an increase, as well as in the Ramsea and SRMR. But we also note that all of the um, variables that we hypothesize would predict intention to volunteer did indeed predict intention to volunteer. So we were able to confirm as well that the TPB model can actually be used to explain volunteering behavior. And that is shown in the next slide, where we have the figure. So note that for attitude towards volunteering and perceived behavioral control were significant predictors of intention to volunteer. In terms of family and peer modeling, it was only peer modeling that significantly predicted intention to volunteer. So this is quite interesting because we see now that the contribution of our study, where we extended the TPB model, and also note that subjective norms was not a significant predictor of intention to volunteer in this particular study. So the discussion of the results will be presented by Dr. Joy Ramo.
Thank you, Dr. Tin. So the following are significant and positive predictors of volunteering intention. We have the attitudes towards volunteering and perceived behavioral control, which are part of the original TPB model, and peer modeling, which is part of our extended TPB model. So the major contribution of our paper is that peer modeling has a significant influence on intention to volunteer, and this highlights the importance of friends in encouraging participation in volunteering activities. Next slide, please. So, a synergy among peer modeling attitudes toward volunteering and perceived behavioral control could further increase the tendency of young people to volunteer. So, some examples wherein we can actually have the synergy would be to design activities that promote a positive attitude towards volunteering and to provide various volunteering venues for students. Next slide, please. Significant predictors based on the original TPB model includes attitude towards volunteering and perceived behavioral control. No? This is actually aligned with other previous studies. Moreover, Marzana et al. In 2015 found that attitude towards volunteering are influenced by the quality and quantity of previous experiences, and therefore these can be used as effective tools to promote the youth's social participation. Next slide, please. So subjective norms as a non-significant predictor of intention to volunteer might be attributed to age, which means that the younger the person is, the more their willingness to volunteer leans on external factors. So this is actually contrary to Ruveni and Werner 2015, because Ruveni and Werner made use of younger students as their sample, while we actually ninth grade students as their sample. Meanwhile, our study actually made use of college students. So according to Ruveni and Werner, we the result of the study, the subjective norms coupled with attitudes bring about perceived behavioral control that also results in stronger behavioral intent. Similar to subjective norms, age of survey respondents might have also contributed to parental modeling being an insignificant predictor of willingness to volunteer among Filipino youth. So according to Minor et al. In 2015, the parents' volunteering activity has a strong influence in their children's civic commitment, especially at a young age, and declines when children becomes older, no, due to environmental factors such as school, friends, and media. And next slide, please. So our conclusion is that the attitudes toward volunteering, perceived behavioral behavioral control and peer modeling are significant predictors of volunteering intention, and this can actually aid universities, colleges, civic organizations, and other local and international institutions in crafting the right communication content when targeting younger people to join civic engagement activities. Next slide, please. Our recommendations to universities, colleges, and organizations would be to design marketing collaterals that highlight the joy of joining activities together with peers. This is aligned with the peer modeling as a significant predictor. Utilize social networking sites such as Facebook and Twitter. So, according to Filsinger and Freytag in 2019, young people who are members of SNS are more willing to volunteer than those who are using the internet for entertainment purposes but have no SNS. We remove the barriers and provide more accessible opportunities and support for the youth to develop the habit of being involved in social action. As we also would like to recommend that there will be adult, no collaboration with adult as part of the civic engagement, and redesign service learning curriculum and include a reflection of one's experiences in voluntary activities. And finally, to future researchers, we can explore the rationale why subjective norms in family modeling are insignificant predictors of volunteering intentions, add additional variable to the proposed model such as altruism, test if differing individual youth characteristics affect intention to volunteer because our study mentioned that age is actually a variable, which might have resulted to a different finding. Conduct study on a different set of sample population or perform a longitudinal analysis and study the conversion from volunteering intention to actual behavior because this is still a gap that has not been addressed in this paper. That's all. Thank you for listening.